Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers. And during Series 2 of this, we've managed to complete a number of planets. We've been out to Vulcanus and Igris and Corundum and Castor and Cubium, and Fulgora, although not in that order. And we've unlocked the various secrets from those and managed to gain various different new and exciting technologies. So I think this would be a good time to sort of put an end to Series 2 and start Series 3, so we'll be doing that in tomorrow's video. But for now, let's have a bit of a look round and see what thoughts the five of us have had about the various planets and the various technologies we've played with. And let's get started off with Vulcanus, because it's the first planet outside the Norvian sphere of influence that we actually went to. And my feelings about Vulcanus is I really like it because it's such a manufacturing powerhouse. You've got absolutely unlimited iron and copper because you can pull the lava out of these pools here, and then with just a little bit of processing in the machines down here, you can make unlimited molten iron, and granted you get a stone byproduct, but you can make unlimited molten iron, which can then be turned into basically whatever you want, whether that's going to be plates or steel or gears or pipes. It just comes straight out of the ground and is free and unlimited, so it's absolutely fantastic for producing large amounts of stuff. And Mark agrees with me, and he feels that we're currently underutilising it, because with the free resources, we should be moving some of our main production over here. It is currently, as we both noted, limited rather by the plastic supply on this planet. All the plastic here is being made by bringing coal in over here and then pulverising it, and then turning it through coal liquefaction into the various types of oil, and then the petroleum gas can be turned into plastic up here. And so we do have a healthy supply of plastic, which is how we're making the red circuits in order to make the blue circuits and so on. But it is a thing that is vaguely limited on this planet, and we have ripped through the coal patch that was here in the middle of the spaghetti originally, and there's another 2 up here, and there's a decent amount in those. We've got more than 5 million up there, but eventually that is all going to get used up. And coal, there is a certain amount of coal available on this planet, but it's not absolutely enormous amounts, and I feel that if we start using this too much, trying to get plastic out of it, then potentially we're going to start having some issues. And the thing is, if we carry on making more and more and more things on this planet and then shipping that with the rocket silos over here, we're going to rip through quite a lot of the blue circuits, although we're bringing some of those in from Lignumus, which certainly helps, and also the low density structures, which are made from plastic as well. And also the rocket fuel, come to think of it, I think we're making that out of oil as well. Yes, we are. So that's all being made from coal. So most of the stuff that goes into making rockets is made from coal in one way or another. And so it'd be nice to start bringing some of that in from other planets, perhaps over to here. So we've got that nice healthy free supply of all of those things, and then we can start really utilising Vulcanus as the manufacturing powerhouse that it so easily could be. It's also an amazing one to go to first because of all the high-tech stuff you get from here. So I commented that you can start making the big crushers and the big drills and the foundries all on this planet, and these make an enormous difference everywhere else you go. Sophia observes that it's also fantastic to come here fairly early on because then you get the cliff explosives, and they're an absolute game changer, especially on some of the weird planets like Maluna, which has these strange sort of fingerprint type cliffs all over the place. And so going out to Vulcanus and then before we came back to Maluna meant that we were then able to build across this way without having an absolute nightmare trying to get through the area over here. And because it's only the research that requires it, you're then quite capable of building those down on Norvis. It was easy enough to get the production set up on Norvis, where it can then be shipped out from our massive rocket silo facility here and just shipped to wherever we need those cliff explosives. Sophia also observed that it's really nice to see the fruits of his labour, so things like the crushers and the drills and the foundries, being used all across the solar system. He likes knowing that all of the foundries and miners being used everywhere else have been produced on Vulcanus, and also that a number of the planets require that constant supply of calcite to be coming in from Vulcanus as well. So that's another resource that we're getting through from this planet, and I think we've got plenty of that. We've got, there's 5.5 million there, and there's another patch of almost 20 million right next to it. So I think we're going to be okay for calcite for quite a long time, although you can see, actually, looking at this, how much the patch of calcite has shrunk in the time we've been digging it up. So we are making significant headroads into it. There's quite a lot left, sure, but we have taken a big bite out of what was available in this patch. Mark also notes that Vulcanus would be an excellent place to do quality construction because, once again, you have free unlimited resources and you have an area to dispose of things if you need to as well. And so from here we could put quality modules in all of these foundries, and then some of these gears and pipes that come out and the steel that comes out would all be slightly higher quality, and we could pipe those off somewhere else so they don't interfere with the system here. And then as we keep a nice steady flow of stuff flowing through on this planet, we could also be then collecting higher tier bits and pieces, whether that's the raw resources from here, whether it's iron plates, whatever it is, we would then have all of those things as higher quality components that we could then potentially use for making things later on. So yes, doing the quality churn with genuinely free resources feels a lot more reasonable than using up something that's technically limited instead. Mike has noted that he missed out on most of Vulcanus, who doesn't have a lot to say, but he did find the Demolishers at least vaguely interesting to start with. But once we found a reasonably good way to deal with them, then they stopped being quite so much of a challenge. They were just sort of a slight annoyance that needs to be cleared up to free up extra space to build in. And I guess that's a bit like the biters on Norvis as well. Once you've got artillery and nukes and you know how to deal with them, they slow you down a little bit because you have to go and clear them out, but they don't really cause you any serious problems. Our second planet was Igris, and this is the one that produces the science enhancer machines that allow you to make research with a 150% productivity bonus. Sophia said he was really looking forward to seeing the research being done with the using the Igrian science enhancers to produce science packs with that massive productivity bonus, and I'm sure he's been really happy to see that as it's actually come into play. Mark liked the two nice challenges on it with the extremely long spoil time of the Cermite over here, and so this is the one where you bring in oil and bricks, and that turns into the Cermite, and then you process that and it turns into raw Cermite, and raw Cermite has a spoil time of 5 hours and is basically useless. But when it spoils into Cermite, which is useful, and we need quite a bit of it. And so that 5-hour spoil time is not reasonable. And so, because freshness percentage carries over in a lot of recipes from the ingredients to the product, and so Mark realised that if you made sure that the Cermite was reasonably spoiled before it got turned into the raw Cermite, then it would only have a relatively short amount of spoil time left before it turned into the proper Cermite, the grey stuff. And from chatting with the mod author, we know he's had a couple of ideas about ways to do that. I mean, obviously you could just wait 5 hours, but ain't nobody got time for that, as they say. He also considered that you could just run the Cermite, the original one, down a long belt for about maybe a minute and a half or maybe a minute and 3/4, something like that, to make sure that it's nearly spoiled before it comes off at the end to be turned into the raw Cermite. But he was quite impressed with Mark's system of putting it in a box, then running a timer, and then when the timer gets to 2.7 million ticks, which is presumably about 1 minute 50 something, then you can load it into the machine over here, quickly make it into raw Cermite, and then it will only have sort of 1 or 2% of its spoil time left, and waiting sort of 5 minutes for it to finish spoiling isn't bad at all. We then ran into a silly little problem over on this planet where we ended up with too much of it and we had a lot of steel being produced, but you know, these things happen. That was relatively easy to clean up, he says, although we do still have 65,000 steel plate from that on this planet. Oops. The other interesting challenge that this planet came up with was the copper production, where copper is produced out of nowhere with these copper production machines, the copper plate machines, but they only run at night, and so that means you can't rely on your solar panels to power them. You need to have massive banks of the accumulators in order to hold that power during the night and then keep them running. Or alternatively, I suppose you could set up other power production systems, but solar power seemed to be quite nice for this planet because whilst there is water, there's not a great deal of it, and so I'd feel bad about pumping it out and shoving it straight through turbines in order to generate power from a nuclear plant, and most of the other methods of generating power you require water in some way, shape or form, apart from solar, and so that's a good one for us to use. Mike also noted the spoilage mechanic as well, although he said it was benign enough that he didn't really notice it, so that just tells me that he wasn't working on the Cermite system over here. Maybe he noticed it because he built the system over here where we were making the Cermite and then deliberately letting it spoil down into steel because we needed some steel. So as far as Mike was concerned, all it was a 2-minute delay on the stuff coming out of the machines before it turned into steel. So I can see why he thought that was fairly benign, because it didn't really affect him much apart from having to wait 2 minutes as the stuff flowed along the belt. This tells me he wasn't keeping a very close eye on the rest of the planet, but never mind. He summarised it fairly neatly as being a relatively simple planet with a few nice elements to it, which I think is fair. There's quite a lot of interesting stuff going on this planet, and it feels different to all of the other ones, and it gives you a nice little mechanic with the science production boost down here. But it wasn't too hard to finish off and get everything up and running the way we wanted it to. Our next planet was Cubium, and this was an interesting and weird one that's feels very different to the others because it doesn't have the same sort of normal Factorio style recipe progressions because of all the sort of the catalyst effect from the cubes. Marcus said that he liked the cube jelly effect and doing the sort of the things that we were doing on the planet with them, and I think he means sort of using them as the catalysts and having them produce things from out of nowhere, which is weird but sort of kind of works on this planet. However, he also feels that having the free cube jelly and all of the things that come from it means that using it on other planets feels very overpowered and perhaps shouldn't be allowed. And that's something we'll get back to in quite a lot more detail a bit later on as we start to talk about how the different planets interacted with each other. He also noted that the dream part of it was a bit of a sort of a weird concept and a bit sort of nonsensical, but it's sort of, I guess it's meant to be a little bit silly, and it certainly is. but then it's sort of fun and a bit weird and a bit different and interesting. And then the whole emotional cracking thing over here was also somewhat meaningless, but again, it just turned into we have a fluid, we do something with it, it turns into other fluids, we do something with those, and it turns into fluids, and so on all the way through. But it did have an interesting theme, which was a little bit of fun. Tristan agrees with the overpoweredness of all the cube jelly stuff, and he says his feeling is to judge it on a sort of planet by planet basis, and generally not allow jelly recipes to run other than with recipes that are clearly designed for that planet. So for example, there is a Norvian themed one that we aren't using yet that I think involves biter eggs in some way, shape or form, and so we're going to get to that later and maybe then consider that it's then at that point a little bit fairer to use it on Norvis. Whereas at the moment, well, obviously it's going to be massively unfair to use the iron and copper production recipes anywhere else, because you are quite literally turning nothing into iron and copper, and so that gives you an unlimited free supply of iron and copper, and these recipes will work on any planet, which I think is probably an oversight in the mod production. I suspect it would be better if some of these recipes were a bit more restricted. Perhaps these ones would only work on this planet, and maybe different planets have different ways to make jelly, and a lot of them don't work on these on normal planets, and basically things to make things a little bit harder. The theme works fine on this planet because that is how this planet works, and it's a bit like Vulcanus also has free iron and copper, and that's great that it has that and it's balanced to get around that. But you can't take that method of producing the iron and copper off over to Norvis. You can take the iron and copper away with you. Sure, you can launch it up in rockets and take it off to other planets that way, but you can't take the method of production with you. Whereas there is nothing stopping you building a system like this with the cubes flowing through and being recycled with a recycler. We're already doing that on some of the other planets, and then just generating enormous quantities of jelly, and then generating unlimited quantities of the metal ores as well, which feels wrong. It feels like you shouldn't be able to do that. Mike says he went into this one expecting to like it, and he did at first, and he enjoyed the cyclical decomposition, in his words, of the cubes. The way that the blue cubes turn into grey cubes over time, and then the grey cubes turn back into blue cubes. So that's why we've got this system down here that is refreshing all the grey cubes simply by having them sitting in these boxes for a while. So you can see in here that we've got various different amounts of time. These ones over here are about to turn back into blue cubes. They've only got 2 minutes left on them, and then when they do, they can be passed across into the inner row of chests and then dropped back onto the belt up here to be passed back out and go around the system again. And that is another interesting use of the spoilage system, which we quite like. He said though that he was starting to get a bit fed up of it by the end because it felt like everything had multiple possible byproduct outputs, which he felt started to overwhelm it a little bit. And I suspect at this point he's talking about the jelly, because it turns into waste matter, that's this blue stuff, and then the waste matter then turns into dreams. I have to admit, I didn't really notice that. I did notice that we did have to think about spoilage everywhere. So, for example, over here we've got an inserter at the top of here that's dumping anything that isn't jelly onto the disposal belt to get rid of it. Fine, so we've got that. And then you need to make sure that all of your assembly machines have something that will get rid of any sort of nonsense that builds up in them. So this one is currently full of waste matter or destabilized cube matter because it got some jelly in it, which then just went off over time. And so there is an inserter that's gradually throwing it away onto the disposal belt. And yes, it's true that basically everything does need some sort of disposal to get rid of the any waste matter that's in there. Certainly anything that uses blue cubes or uses jelly will need some way of getting rid of any excess when it inevitably fills up with spoiled stuff. But that didn't bother me as much as it seems to have bothered him. He suggested that perhaps as an alternative, it might be interesting if instead of having all the jelly and the spoilage of that, you concentrated a little bit more on the actual cubes themselves, and maybe they had 3 or 4 different states they went through. So maybe they turned from blue cubes into green cubes, into orange cubes, and then back in, and then into grey cubes, and then into black cubes and white cubes, and whatever. So it goes through more stages, and maybe even has it have them spoil in different orders. So you could have multiple types of blue cube that could spoil in different. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure the Factorio spoilage mechanics would allow that, but having some extra states in there, so rather than going just between 2 states, it went through a few more, could indeed be quite useful. It would take the same sort of general idea of cubium and then make it that bit more complicated. And I quite like that idea because it's something that's a bit different, and I'm generally a great fan of seeing things done a bit differently. And I think that's part of why I quite like cubium. There's a lot of things on this planet that are different from standard normal Factorio shenaniganery, and so seeing it done differently is always interesting, and I think I'm always a fan of that. And that's one of the things that is going to be a recurring theme across all the planets, because they have all added in something new, interesting and different. Well, I think we've all been a fan of that. Mike also commented that he's not so enthusiastic about the cube science enhancement. And the whole point of cubium is you get all of these extra powerful science recipes that you can see across here. And so, for example, with this one, with for red science, you can put in your normal copper plate and iron gear, but if you also put in an energized microcube and some dream concentrate, which again is another thing that comes from Cubium, and is basically free because it comes just from what cubes spoil into, then instead of only getting 1 red science pack out, you get 3 out instead. And that goes across quite a lot of the different recipes. We can look at the blue science as well, and you get 6 out of this one because normally it produces 2. So generally you get 3 times the reward for the same amount of input into the recipe. So it makes your science much, much cheaper. And initially and in theory, he was a fan of that and generally in favour of it. The problem is that the system to do that, whilst it adds a little bit of complexity in initially, because you have to design something like this to run it, eventually all you need to do is copy and paste this system. There's no additional logistics, it's just drop this in, provide it with some cubes, and then let it run. And so that's a bit less interesting than the Ygrian method, which requires you to ship quantities of the magic fluid off to the other planets in order to get that science boost over there. He notes that with the same sort of thing being dropped in here on Fulgora, and this looks very, very similar, except that we're using the solid fuel recipe to respawn our cubes, because oil is very, very cheap here and it's very easy to make solid fuel. But otherwise it's more or less the same thing, and as I've noted a number of times, it has made Fulgora much, much easier than it should have been, in inverted commas, because we can produce the science much more effectively. Which is a bit of a shame, and I sort of do agree with him there. The fact that we've been able to produce 10 times as much science from the inputs as we should be able to on Fulgora, it's a bit of an issue, and is one we're going to return to later as well. And speaking of Fulgora, that is in fact the next planet we're going to take a look at. Sophia has noted that the Fulgoran recycling tech is interesting, although perhaps there's a lot of the byproducts are not really needed. So yes, you can see along here that there's a lot of recycling going on. At this point, there are some things we need. Stone seems to be one of them, interestingly enough, and concrete has always been a bit of a struggle on this planet. But in general, we've got a lot of scrap flowing in here, and then it's all being churned through, and then a lot of the stuff that comes out of that is then just being recycled to be thrown away and possibly recycled until we just don't have any of it. And you can sort of tell which ones we're using by looking over here for the inserters that are actually running. So concrete is going in here and being taken away by the bots. Stone is coming in here and then being dropped onto the belt because we are actually apparently using that. But otherwise, most of the things that are coming through are now just being recycled down to nothing, which does feel like a bit of a shame. And this gave Mark some weird feelings as well when he first encountered Fulgora in his solo run. He doesn't like wasting stuff, so the idea of just having all of these resources and then chucking them into recyclers to destroy them just didn't feel right to him. He has noted though that would make it a good playground for some of the quality stuff. So potentially, instead of having speed modules in all of these recyclers, we could have quality modules in them, and then we'd end up with a certain amount of quality ingredients, and then maybe we'd end up destroying quite a lot of those as well, but at least we'd potentially then have the opportunity to get some slightly better quality stuff, and maybe this would be a good source for some high quality advanced equipment, because there's lots of things like blue circuits and low density structures that are just produced straight out of the scrap on this planet, and they're quite valuable, so being able to make them at a higher quality very, very quickly and easily without having to go through previous tiers and making quality iron and copper and plastic could be quite useful. Mark said he was also quite surprised with how quickly we solved Fulgora, and I think part of that is probably because it was a vanilla planet, and therefore we sort of expected it to be a bit more juicy, a bit more complete, have a bit more to it than the modded planets, because it's had more time and effort put into it by the devs. But we dropped in here, and we had a system producing science within one stream, and I think we had pretty much all of what you see here done within 2 streams. Now, okay, there were 5 of us playing, and we had a ship turn up that was dropping enormous quantities of buildings and belts and all that sort of stuff down from orbit, so we didn't have to start building anything really on this planet apart from the EM facilities. And if you look around here, we've got, we're making the things that are from this planet in the EM facilities across the top. We're also making a load of electric engines, which I assume are for the rocket silos, and we're also making the recyclers and the EM plants. And there's a few things we're making down here, like accumulators, and there's some pipes and some sticks and things being made, but I assume those are generally for other things, like refined concrete. Oh, and of course the lightning protectors. But basically, most of the stuff on this planet has just been dropped down from space because it's just easier that way, and so Fulgora was quite small and was over quite quickly, which is a little bit of a surprise. Mike has commented that he enjoyed how production is sort of inverted, because you bring in the very, very advanced things like the blue circuits and the low density structures and the batteries and so on. And then to get the lower tier ingredients that you need potentially for building other things on this planet, you then recycle them and pull them apart and get out the ingredients that you're then going to be using elsewhere. And I agree, that is a nice twist and a nice feel, and it makes the planet feel a bit different to absolutely everywhere else. It also sort of throws off your normal expectations. To quote him directly, we all know that green circuits are cheap and we all know that blue circuits are expensive, but on Fulgora that's kind of inverting. Now you do get 5 green circuits out of each blue circuit you recycle, so you still do get green circuits fairly easily, but he's definitely got a point, and it makes things feel very, very different. He's found the power management interesting as well, with the harnessing the power of the lightning and then storing it in accumulators to carry on using during the day, which, yeah, it's very, very different. And I guess with the combination of solar and lightning rods you could have power all the time, but with accumulators is much more fun, and the idea of charging up massive battery banks from lightning strikes is also really cool. He also commented on combining the recycling and quality mechanics. It's not something we've done yet, but it's clearly something we've all been thinking about, and when we think has a nice amount of potential. So maybe early in the next series we'll have a bit of a look around and think about upgrading some of these planets, and maybe going in and doing some big changes on them, and making them do new things with some of the ideas we've had and some of the new technology we've discovered. He's also noted, again, coming back once again to the overpowered science production system, that it's a bit of a shame that we were able to fit everything essentially onto this one single island here. Now, I think we did get fairly lucky with this island. This is quite a big island, and it's linked to another medium-sized island down here, which had quite a lot of scrap on it when we first got here. And then there is another island just close enough by that we can run not even a high quality pylon over to, and we're able to then get this really, really good starting spot with a massive island. But even so, I think if we'd been playing without the massive science boosts, we would still have had to expand out and think about doing things a little bit differently, and it's a bit of a shame that we didn't have to. He said he was looking forward to the challenge of scaling up with the oil sea being a real obstacle, because you can't landfill it, at least not at the moment. You can build railway lines across it, yes, so we'd end up then having to pass trains around, and then each island would need its own power supply system because you can't pass the cables between them. So again, we'd have this sort of thing over here with some lightning conductors and a load of accumulators. So yeah, this sort of thing is really, really nice. It's just a bit of a shame we didn't have to expand a little bit further, because, well, there's another nice big island down here. It would be good to put another component of the production down on this one. Maybe later on we'll start doing more science, or doing the science a bit faster, and we'll start to need more and more and more and more and more science packs, and therefore we'll want to scale these things up. Or maybe we'll decide to do a bit of a self-imposed challenge and go, actually, you know what, this is a bit too easy. You're not allowed to use both Igrian science machines and Cubium science boosting. You have to pick one or the other, and maybe not even both on the vanilla planets. I don't know. We'll have to come up with something, I think, to make it a little bit more fun, because I feel Fulgora, there's a bit more to it, and we sort of didn't see some of the challenges as we played through here. Next up is Corundum, and we don't have a huge amount to say about this one, but I did enjoy all the different loops in the production that were going through the various sulfur recipes across here. From the small ones, like where we were trying to make the hydrogen sulfide here, but some of the petroleum gas comes back out again and has to be looped back round. Onto the next stage, where one of the recipes for making water also kicks out a certain amount of sulfur, which you have to loop back round and put in again. And then a bit further up over here, where we make the iron ore, which gets passed over here to be made into iron plates, and then gets fed back round again to go into as iron plates to go into here to allow us to get the copper ore, which then goes back into, which also then produces the green goop, which allows us to then make the iron ore again. So we've got another loop in there. And then the dilute sulfuric acid that comes out of this step can then be turned back into concentrated sulfuric acid, which gets looped all the way back around in here and goes back into this stage to make the blue goop, to make the green goop, to make the iron, to make the dilute sulfuric acid. And then also you get steam out of that as well, which can then be turned back into water, which goes back into making the sulfuric acid to go back into over here, and then round. So there are quite a lot of nice loops on this planet, which I found quite sort of satisfying, and it messed with my brain a little bit as we were getting it up and running, but it was I quite enjoyed that and thought it was a nice way to do it. And it was also quite nice that most of the things that looped around were fluids, because that makes it a little bit easier to balance them. Doing that with solids, whilst we did have to do it with the sulfur down here, requires priority inserters and making sure you've got enough buffer and so on. Whereas with fluids, it's a little bit easier, because you just dump everything into a tank and then say pump it in and pump it out based on the amount of fluid in that tank. So it's a little bit easier that way. Mark says the planet didn't leave a huge impression on him, but that's mostly because he was only doing relatively simple stuff. Things like digging up calcite and probably the platinum and making platinum plates, all of which is fairly basic stuff. He also wasn't a great fan of the new chemical plant that we get on this planet, and Tristan has pointed out that perhaps it's because there is a better vanilla one that will come a bit later, and so you don't want to have those two chemical plants sort of both being, here is your improved chemical plant. You need to somehow make them seem different. And perhaps you could have done that with different amounts of productivity bonuses versus speed bonuses or something like that, which would make it a little bit more interesting. Now, one other difference is that these are catalytic chemical plants, and that means there are some recipes that can be done in these that can't be done in other types of chemical plants, and presumably not even in the advanced ones that we're going to see later. And so it does give them their own little niche. but maybe it's not that valuable a niche and they are a little bit overshadowed by the one that we haven't actually discovered yet. The other thing that you get from this planet is the platinum thrusters, which we're going to be putting on our spaceships at some point in the future. So there is another new toy from here that may well come in very, very useful in the future. We shall have to see. Our final new planet is Castra, and I thought the battlefield data mechanic here was very interesting, having a resource that comes out of machines that are just scattered randomly around the map and then has a relatively short spoilage time is quite interesting, because then you end up with these belts snaking around your factory, and then every so often you have to put in somewhere that will actually turn the resource into science packs, because you can't wait for it to be brought all the way back to a very central point, because it'll have gone off by then. And so you end up flying out your ammunition and your tanks in this case in order to make the science packs locally and then spit out a large quantity of them and then passing them down the belt to go back into your main factory to be shipped away again. But the idea of having this extra resource that spoils quite so quickly and is just produced randomly by these machines struck me as being quite interesting. Mike also thought it's kind of cool that the data collectors spawn the items in a somewhat random order. So sometimes you'll get out the battlefield data, sometimes you'll get out a red circuit, sometimes it'll be a low density structure, and so on and so on. So you have no real logic behind it. You just need to deal with whatever comes out and do sort of sorting and recycling and so on later on. He felt that linked quite nicely into the Fulgoran idea of you get what you get, now do something about it. But unfortunately, in both planets, there's never any sort of real necessity to balance the inputs or do anything particularly clever with them, because you can just throw away any excesses into a recycler, and we're doing the same sort of thing over here. So when we get too many low density structures as we have at the moment, they're just being put into recyclers, and okay, we're getting copper, steel and plastic out of them, which is all useful. As you can see, the bots are coming over and taking it away, and we aren't getting ludicrous amounts of any of those over here. We're not needing to recycle any of it, but it still feels like a bit of a shame. You don't have to do any particularly clever trying to balance things. It's just, well, I've got too much of this thing, so I'll throw it away and recycle it and turn it into nothingness. Mike has described it as a distributed production system with belts to concentrate the products down into the central factory. And yeah, that is a way to look at it. Yeah, we've got a big chunk of factory down here that has a certain amount of complexity, but then all the resource gathering is going on indistantly. And rather than just going out to mines like we've done that here for uranium, sure, because that does come out of a mine. But everything else, it's not just here is a mine, let's get stuff from it. It's okay, well, there are lots of these data collectors scattered around, so we'll need to run belts out to all of them and then just bring everything into a central point, or bring everything into a central point via something that can deal with the stuff that's going to go off fairly quickly. The other point we talked about quite a bit is how the planet is hostile and grows gradually more hostile in time. And we've talked a bit about how the planet will sometimes spawn in gun turrets around the data collectors, at least the ones that haven't been pacified, and those are mildly dangerous. Unfortunately, we feel like the planet was a little bit overhyped. We thought it was going to be a lot more dangerous than it was, and I think this may have been because we dropped in with 5 people, and we therefore were able to sort of almost rush the planet, and so the planet didn't get dangerous enough quickly enough for it to really affect us. Yes, we got a few turrets popping up, but they can be dealt with in seconds with our personal laser defences or with our rocket launchers, and so they were never a significant danger. I did see in some of my recording sessions when I was spending a bit more time doing things before we'd gone in and pacified the planet quite so much, I did see some flame turrets appearing, and they were quite destructive and they were quite a bit more exciting, but we never saw any of those during the actual streams, and I'm wondering if perhaps there's a sort of certain amount of time gating behind it, and maybe because we see the planet gradually researching things and we get little messages popping up in the bottom corner of the screen every so often to tell us that Castra has researched something. And so I think there might be a combination of factors here. Perhaps we didn't give the planet enough time because there were quite a lot of us, and also maybe it took the planet longer to come up with the actually dangerous technologies because we've got so many researchers available for the planet to do, and so perhaps it spent a load of time working its way through wooden gun turrets and wooden burner automation and basic agriculture and so on, all these sort of things that don't really matter as far as the planet itself is concerned and how getting hostile is concerned. And so it only really got to normal gun turrets and then eventually the flame turrets, and if we give it a bit more time, maybe it's going to come up with something particularly difficult and dangerous and exciting, and perhaps we're going to have to come back to Castra in a bit of a panic in a few streams time because they'll have done a load more research and we'll start to see some actually dangerous things being spawned in on this planet. But as it was, and while we're out there, it was a little bit of a disappointment. People saying, oh yes, Castra's going to be really hard, you better be careful, make sure you don't start the processes happening too soon. But it really wasn't, and I think it's because of those two factors. It's taken the planet longer to get to a dangerous state than would have been expected, and we got through the planet more quickly than you normally would because there's 5 of us. Marcus had similar thoughts that we should probably have had more pressure from the locals, but he wonders also if it's maybe intended to be something that comes out back and bites you once you leave the planet. So he's also thinking along the same sort of lines that I am, that now we've left and we're off playing on another planet, maybe things are going to suddenly all go a bit wrong and we're going to have to panic and try and sort something out over here. That would be interesting to find out. He also thinks it would have been a bit more interesting to have perhaps the more of the resources restricted completely, a bit like on Fulgora, and say, well, you can only get your plastic from the stuff coming out of the towers, or you can only get your millerite from them, although you'd have to use up a lot less millerite. But if there were things that only came out of the towers, other than, of course, the battlefield data, then maybe that would have made things a little bit more interesting and a little bit harder. Marcus also noted that the water balancing felt a bit unbalanced, and we ended up, and especially because we ended up using the corundum recipes to try and sort it out. Now, I think at the time I would have agreed with him, and I think we did feel like the water was, we just weren't getting enough water out because we were trying to get these nuclear power plants up and running, and we just couldn't produce enough water to make them happy. That said, since then we've got to a point where we've got more water than we know what to do with. We're using it in the Igrian pump jacks, which gives us a bit of a productivity boost. We are using the Castor recipe for making sulfur and water, and we're not using the corundum one because we have so much water. And so perhaps it's one of those things where, with a little bit more patience and a bit of thinking about where our resources were going, maybe things would have worked out a little bit better. And that's all the planets from this series. Tomorrow I'll talk about some of our other thoughts, how the planets interact, various texts that are too good or too bad, and wrap up Series 2, ready to start Series 3 next week. I hope you found this interesting. Have you tried any of these planets? Let me know what you thought of them. We'll be back on Monday for another Planetary Pioneers stream at 7:30 UK time, and if you want to try the mod pack for yourself, you can always download it from the Factorio mod portal. I'll be doing a single player stream on Wednesday, and as always there'll be videos every Thursday and Friday, so please make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.